American History TV on C-SPAN 3.
We interrupt this program for an NBC News special report. Here is Garrett Utley.
Good afternoon. We have a late and really, truly a sensational report coming in from East Germany. In a news conference which ended just a few minutes ago in East Berlin, government officials announced that communist East Germany has now declared their border open with West Germany. The official statement is that East German citizens now have the right to cross directly from East Germany into West Germany. Up to now, as you know, the tens of thousands of East Germans going west have had to pass through other communist East Bloc nations, most of them passing through Czechoslovakia. But as of right now, according to the official statement, a news conference just concluded they have the right to go directly to West Germany. NBC correspondent Dennis Murphy is in Berlin right now. He's been following the events there, the news conference on television. Dennis, what more do you know about this startling decision?
Garrick, it is truly astonishing in the series of events that have happened in the last few days, the last few hours. Literally within the last 5 minutes on television here in West Berlin and also in the East, the Germans, East and West, heard Mr. Schabowski, who speaks for the government, he's the media spokesman, say that there are no more borders, that East Germans may cross to the West over whatever existing border frontiers there are. And as you said, of course, that eliminates the route through Czechoslovakia. We've been following the last few days the hundreds of thousands of East Germans who are leaving via that route. That is no longer necessary. In effect, I think what we have here, Garrick, is a Berlin Wall, which is a symbol. But the frontiers themselves are now open. And he says that in the next few weeks there will be some provisional time to prepare the legislation to make this all correct and constitutional. But what we've seen now in the last few hours is the collapse of all the borders between East and West Germany.
Dennis Murphy, as you just said, that Berlin Wall, which divides the two sides of the cities, is a symbol, perhaps not much more than that. But as far as you know, will that wall itself, along the Brandenburg Gate near Checkpoint Charlie, will those openings be open for East Germans who want to come directly from East Berlin into West Berlin?
As we read the words of Mr. Schabowski, the words that were read to the people here tonight, that is correct. All of the checkpoints that we know, Checkpoint Charlie and the others, those gates will be open. It remains to be seen how the news is going to be taken here in the next few hours. But the very grim facade of the wall, where there are only a few entrances coming and going with all of the dogs and the guards, exist only as a symbol at this point, because the gates will be open according to what Schabowski told the people on television tonight.
And I might add right now, Dennis, we're just getting a bulletin on the wire service coming from East Berlin saying exactly what you've just reported, that Günter Schabowski, the East German spokesman, says that the new announcement means, the new order means that people can pass through the Berlin Wall itself from East Berlin to West Berlin. Of course, these developments coming as the communist leadership, the communist authorities in East Berlin have been under tremendous pressure because of the tens of thousands of East Germans fleeing their country. As of right now, as of this evening in East Germany, they can leave whenever they want and however they want. Of course, we'll have further developments throughout the afternoon and a full report this evening on NBC Nightly News from Tom Brokaw, who himself is in East Berlin today. That's the news for now from East Germany. I'm Garrett Utley, NBC News in New York.
This has been an NBC News special report. We interrupt this program for an NBC News special report. Here is Garrett Utley.
Good afternoon, and here is the latest information coming to us from East Germany, where a short while ago government officials made the very startling announcement that East German citizens will now have the right to leave their country to travel directly to West Germany or to West Berlin. It will no longer be necessary for East Germans leaving their country to travel through other communist nations such as Hungary, Poland, or Czechoslovakia. That is the route that tens of thousands of East Germans have been taking over these last several weeks. The announcement was made by Günter Schabowski, who is the spokesman and member of the ruling Politburo. As you know, the government there has been under very heavy pressure from the new political opposition and from the tens of thousands leaving that country. Here is how the announcement was made on East German television this evening. The announcer here says that the communist leadership has decided to draw up a new travel law, but until that law has been passed by the East German parliament, East Germans will have the right to cross through all border points between East Germany and West Germany, including East Berlin and West Berlin. That announcement was made at the news conference, which concluded just a few minutes ago in East Berlin. Of course, 2 points to keep in mind here. First of all, the Berlin Wall, that wall of concrete and barbed wire and minefield, still stands. But as of right now, it appears to be nothing more than a symbol of the old Iron Curtain, because East Germans, East Berliners, will now have the right to leave through the wall directly into West Berlin itself. The government announcement said that East Germans will have to have visas to go out, but that an order was given today by the Communist Party leadership to the police authorities along the border to issue those visas to anyone who wants to leave, and to issue them quickly. So, to wrap up again, the East German government has bowed to the increasing pressure from its own citizenry, the 16 million East Germans who have been demanding greater freedom, including the freedom to travel. As of now, they have that right, that freedom, to leave their country legally to come to the West. We'll have more information as it comes to us throughout the afternoon from East Berlin. And this evening, Tom Brokaw will be reporting directly from East Berlin on NBC Nightly News. That's it for now. I'm Garrett Utley, NBC News, New York.
This has been an NBC News special report. We interrupt this program for an NBC News special report. Here is Garrett Utley.
Good afternoon. We are continuing to follow developments in East Germany. A short while ago, as you may know, the East German government, the communist leaders there, announced that they are opening their border between East and West Germany from East Berlin to West Berlin through the Berlin Wall itself. That announcement, a very surprising, important announcement, came this afternoon, stateside time, New York time, in East Berlin, made by the chief official spokesman of the Communist Party there. Tom Brokaw is in East Berlin at this moment. He was covering that news conference. Tom, give us the details.
Well, Garrett, it was a surprise because it came at the end of a lengthy news conference from Günter Schabowski, who is the East Berlin Communist Party chief, and it was almost by accident that he told the assembled reporters that the Politburo recommended this afternoon, and it is now about to become formal government policy, that any East German citizen who wants to leave this country temporarily or permanently will be able to do so by going through the many checkpoints of the Berlin Wall, by crossing the borders into the West. It will no longer be necessary to go to Hungary or Czechoslovakia to get out of here. This, in effect, Garrick, this dissolves the Berlin Wall, although, of course, it will remain standing physically.
And, of course, it's been there since, standing there since 1961. Now, we're familiar with the pictures of the tens of thousands of East Germans who have been coming to West Germany over the last several weeks and months. Is one of the ideas that the East Germans have is that this could ease the pressure on them by giving East Germans the right to leave directly to the West?
Well, I think there are two intentions, two strategies here. One is that they've got to relieve the burden on Czechoslovakia. That's the cover tonight. But the underlying motivation is that the Communist Party hopes that this will demonstrate its good intentions, its determination to reform this country. It has been trying everything, as you know, in the last several weeks, including throwing out the hardliners, Erich Honecker, and other members of the Politburo, today promising free elections, recognizing opposition parties, and then tonight, this dramatic announcement that the wall, in effect, after now almost 30 years, is coming down.
Tom Brokaw in East Berlin, thank you very much. Of course, we'll be looking forward to your report this evening from Berlin on NBC Nightly News. Reaction is also starting to come in from Washington, from the Bush administration. This afternoon, Secretary of State Jim Baker had this to say about the East German declaration.
It would seem to me that it would be a very positive development, and it should be a development that we should welcome. If indeed the announcement means that they have opened the border to free travel. We've been talking for a long time about freedom of travel as being a basic human right. We've been talking for a long time about open borders, and we've been talking for a long time about the importance of seeing the wall come down. Now, I don't know what this announcement means because I haven't seen it yet in terms of its full impact, but if they are indeed opening their borders, I think that's a positive development.
Secretary of State Jim Baker, John Dancy, you cover the State Department like the rest of us. Secretary of State Baker is trying to figure out what all this means. There's considerable concern in the administration that things may be going too far, too fast.
This is not necessarily a happy development, Garrett, because what it means is that there is now great instability. We've seen the East German government try one strategy after another to deal with this, but there is a period of instability. Diplomacy basically does not like instability. Remember your history that the assassination at Sarajevo, a small event in itself, eventually touched off World War I.
But we're not talking about that in this situation. The fact is, whatever the diplomats may be thinking of this the decision made by the East Germans today, it should and will be welcomed as the fact that the wall is being opened up.
I think the thing that they will welcome the most, Garrick, is the fact that it may now lance the boil and let off some of the pressure so that you don't have such instability in East Germany that eventually there might be clashes between citizens and the police.
We should also remember that all of this is happening just a few weeks before the summit conference between Bush and Gorbachev in the Mediterranean. Exciting times. John Dancy, thank you very much. At the Department of Defense, Fred Francis, who covers military matters, is standing by with the Pentagon's view on what's happening in East Germany today. Fred?
Well, Garrick, in the last hour, I've spoken to several senior military officials in this building, both civilian and military, and they are quite frankly awestruck by all of this. One of them, who has been deeply involved in looking ahead a year or two on what U.S. military cuts would mean in Europe on the budget, said, consider the impact of a U.S. military in Europe without walls. Consider the impact of the U.S. budget in Europe where there is no credible threat of war. And those are significant numbers. Right now, there are 770,000 U.S. Americans in Europe, 320,000 assigned to NATO, soldiers, men and women, another 300,000 dependents of civilians, 150,000 civilians working there, an extraordinary number, and it amounts to approximately $170 billion a year of U.S. taxpayers' money. And if there is a Europe without a credible threat of war, with a Warsaw Pact that cannot mount an attack on the West, then is there the need for all these troops? And those are the numbers and the surprising calculations that are going on in this building today.
And so, the Pentagon, thank you very much. Of course, those are very important, exciting questions to face. We are not there yet. Where we are right now on this Thursday in November is that the East German government, the communist leaders, have decided to open their borders as of tomorrow morning. Any East German citizen can leave to the West at his or her own choosing through the East-West German border or even through the Berlin Wall itself. Hard to believe, but that's the news of today. And this evening, Tom Brokaw will be reporting from Berlin on NBC Nightly News. I'm Garrick Utley, NBC News in New York.
This has been an NBC News special report.
Our objective is Europe whole and free. And is it a step towards that? I would say yes. Gorbachev talks about a common home. Is it a step towards that? Probably so.
What do you think the implications are for immigration to this country, Mr. President? Do you think we'll be seeing very many of these new refugees?
There's no indication of that. These are Germans going to the Federal Republic of Germany.
What's the danger here of events just spinning out of control? Secretary Baker commented earlier about how rapid the pace of change has been in Eastern Europe. Nobody really expected this to happen as quickly as it did. Is there a danger here that things are accelerating too quickly?
Well, I wouldn't want to say this kind of development makes things be moving too quickly at all. It's the kind of development that we have long encouraged by our strong support for the Helsinki Final Act. So I'm not going to hypothecate that it may anything goes too fast.
So you don't
but we are handling it in a way where we are not trying to give anybody a hard time. We're saluting those who can move forward with democracy. We are encouraging the concept of a Europe whole and free, and so we just welcome it. But I don't like to go into a lot of hypothesis about too much change or too rapid change, or what I'd do, what our whole team here would do if something went wrong. We're not. I think it's being handled by the West very well, and certainly you salute the people in East Germany, GDR, whose aspirations for freedom seem to be a little further down the road now.
Mr. President, do you think now that East Germany appears to be moving in the direction of Poland and Hungary, that the rest of the Eastern Bloc can resist this? I'm thinking Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Romania.
No.
Will they be the next?
I don't think anyone can resist it. in Europe or in Western Hemisphere.
Did you ever
That's
imagine?
one of the great things about dynamic change in Central America. It's moving in our direction.
Did you ever imagine anything like this happening
On your watch?
We've imagined it, but I can't say that I foresaw this development at this stage. No, I didn't foresee it, but imagining it, yes. When I talk about a Europe whole and free, we're talking about this kind of freedom to come and go, this kind of staying with and living by the Helsinki Final Act, which gives the people the rights to come and go.
You know, in what you just said, this is a sort of great victory for our side in the big East-West battle, but you don't seem elated, and I'm wondering if you're thinking of the problems.
I'm not an emotional kind of guy.
Well, how elated are you?
I'm very pleased. And I've been very pleased with a lot of other developments. And as I've told you, I think the United States part of this, which is not related to this development today particularly, is being handled in a proper fashion. And we'll have some that'll suggest more flamboyant courses of action for this country. And we're, I think, handling this properly with allies, staying in close touch, and this dynamic change, trying to help as development takes place, trying to enhance reform, both political and economic. And so the fact that I'm not bubbling over, maybe it's getting along towards evening, because I feel very good about it.
Well, what I wanted to ask is the second part of that was, is your second thought, what are we going to do if it really does explode over there, coming into play here? I mean, obviously, if they just flood into West Germany, they're handling it now, but they've only gotten 200,000. What if they get 1 million? What if they get 2 million?
Well, what I'd like to think is that the political change in the GDR would catch up very fast with this liberation, if you will. You may remember that before I went to Poland, I don't know whether Jim Baker was sitting next to me. I know Brent was there and John Sununu, and I was asked by a Polish journalist if I were a young Pole, what would my advice be? And what I said is, I think you ought to stay there and participate in this dramatic change in your country. You ought to feel the surge of freedom, feel the move toward democracy, and be a part of it. And these are Germans, and Germans love their country. And at some point, I think a lot of Germans who have felt pent in and unable to move are going to say, look, we can move, but wouldn't it be better to participate in the reforms that are taking place in our own country? So I think it's too early to predict it, because these openings are there. That means everybody is going to take off.
Do you think this will give you a stronger position when you go on the ship next month and you're talking to President Gorbachev? I mean, that your side is winning. I mean, is that the kind of thing you're going to communicate to him?
I'm not going to approach it. He's already expressed his interest in a common European home. We've phrased it differently. We've said a Europe whole and free. And when you see citizens wanting to go and flee what has been an oppressive society, clearly that is a message that Mr. Gorbachev will understand. He sees it not only in Eastern Europe, but he sees it inside the Soviet Union. And so we'll have a good, lively, before these developments took place, I have said that we would be discussing the rapid change inside Eastern Europe, and we've been talking about that today. Just before you all came in here, we've been talking about the Gorbachev meeting, and one of the things that we are determined we will discuss, and I know he'll want to discuss, is this change.
Mr. President, you saying you think maybe East Germans will want to stay and participate in reforming their country. That suggests you think German reunification is some ways off. What is your view on German reunification?
I don't say that they're related. Huh?
Is this bring it closer?
Well, I don't know. I think it's way too early to speak on that. I've spoken out on the question of German reunification. I noticed the President of France President Mitterrand spoke out. I've heard what Chancellor Kohl has had to say about it. But, Michael, I don't know whether this, the development of today speeds up the day or not.
Mr. President, will you consider lifting Jackson and Vanik restrictions on East Germany?
Discussing a wide array of those subjects with the Soviets, I'm sure, including, I know of their interest in talking about that, so we'll be prepared to talk about it.
Are you going to be thanking the Chancellor Kohl in the next couple of days?
I'd like to talk to him soon, but he's off in Poland. I may try to get him there, but I talked to him quite recently. We confer quite regularly.
Have you talked to any of the other?
Not yet. No.
Will you try to reach Mitterrand?
You might want to talk about it.
Thank you.
President George Bush speaking just moments ago from the Oval Office on the surprise announcement from the government of East Germany that they were opening their borders, all their borders to the west, giving the East German people freedom to travel where they wish, as long as they wish, for the first time since the Berlin Wall was erected in 1961. Early on in that news conference, President Bush was referring to West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who has just left for a trip to Poland, left before the surprise announcement was made. West Germany, of course, has been besieged by refugees, 200,000 of them over the last several weeks, 50,000 of them since Saturday alone. The U.S. Pentagon has announced that it's agreed to temporarily provide emergency housing for about close to 1,000 of the East Germans flooding into the West. There's a lot more reaction in Washington. Robert Hager is standing by there. Bob?
Mary Alice, as you can imagine, yes, everybody is talking about this here. Just before the president spoke, Vice President Dan Quayle called reporters into his office at the old Executive Office building and said that events in East Germany were not moving too fast. In fact, he said the sooner the better. There was a flurry on the Senate floor with several senators speaking out. The Majority Leader, George Mitchell of Maine, said that it was a step that the East Germans had to take. Let's listen to that now.
Today's decision, not an act of democracy, not an act to please or placate the West, but a desperate act of survival by the East German government to permit their people to leave, represents the symbolic destruction of the Berlin Wall.
But there was a contrasting reaction from the Minority Leader, Republican Bob Dole of Kansas, a statement on the Senate floor that was very restrained, and I thought...
Closed as well as open. Talk of free elections can turn out to be nothing more than talk. There is a new Politburo with some dead wood removed, but 7 of the 11 members are holdovers from the old Politburo, and they are undoubtedly still powerful forces which will see all the recent developments as abhorrent.
By coincidence, this was an afternoon when the House of Representatives passed the defense spending bill, so that produced a lot of debate about military spending in the House, and included in that is a lot of money for high-tech military items. Later, 2 congressmen of different stripes, Liberal Democrat Ron Dellums and Conservative Republican John Kasich, both offered the same view, questioning why are we spending all this money on high-tech military items when things like this are going on in Central Europe. Mary Alice?
Okay, thank you, Bob. NATO, of course, is also very concerned about this. Remember that the Berlin Wall, put up in August of 1961, has shaped the politics and policies of a whole generation. John Cochran is now standing by at the White House with more reaction. John?
Mary Alice, I was struck by how low-key the president was, how cautious, how prudent, adjectives we use all the time in describing George Bush. A couple of reasons why he didn't appear more elated in public about the announcements of the past 2 days from East Germany. First of all, he doesn't want to gloat. After all, he's got this meeting coming up on the 2nd and 3rd of December with Gorbachev. The worst thing Bush could do from a diplomatic standpoint, and he knows it, is to gloat and to embarrass Gorbachev as they prepare for their talks. And secondly, it's a little early to gloat. East Germans are not out of the woods yet. It's still possible there could be a crackdown. There's still some conservatives in the Politburo, even in the new Politburo in East Germany. This could all turn around. At the last moment, you could see Egon Krenz or his successor
in the East German Communist Party decide they've tried everything else, they've tried to institute reforms, now they will crack down, now they will use force. That is a possibility. So George Bush is not counting his chickens too early. He is that cautious president.
We've talked about this being a gamble by Egon Krenz. We've talked about it being a gamble by Gorbachev. Can you determine which one the president views as being the mover and shaker behind this action today?
Well, the feeling here is that none of this would have happened if Mikhail Gorbachev did not exist. And there's also the feeling that Gorbachev has let Egon Krenz know that he would not tolerate, would not support a crackdown, a military or police slugging it out in the streets. That just would not be tolerated by Gorbachev in the White House view, because after all, Gorbachev has said he's not going to do that in his own country. However, there are people in the White House, some of the people who don't trust Mr. Gorbachev quite so much, who point out that from time to time in the Soviet Union, you still see the KGB knocking heads in the streets of Moscow. So the feeling here is that Gorbachev is ultimately responsible for what's happening, but as I say, there's a feeling here that complete victory. They're not saying that the Iron Curtain is definitely down yet, Mary Alice.
We interrupt this program for an NBC News special report. Here is Mary Alice Williams.
Astonishing events today unfolding in East Germany. The Berlin Wall that separated East and West and shaped the politics of a generation is no longer a barrier to freedom. The East German government, in a surprise announcement today, said that its borders to the West would be open, its people given the right to travel freely anywhere they want for as long as they want, for the first time since the Berlin Wall was erected in 1961. With us now from San Antonio is the West German Ambassador Jürgen Rufus. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Ambassador. Your reaction to these amazing events?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. I think it is breathtaking events for us. I haven't heard the details yet on how this new permission to travel from GDR, from East Germany to West Germany is going to be shaped. But I think it has been a demand from the East Germans as well as from our side for a long time that there will be an opportunity to travel freely from East Germany to West Germany. And if that comes about, I think this is going to be a very important and remarkable step. And I share your opinion. I think it will reduce the importance of the wall. With other words, it will punch a hole into the Berlin Wall. And let me add, I think if these steps are being taken, that may be an encouragement for the Germans in GDR, that they see that reforms are taking place and that it might encourage them to stay in East Germany and to see how and when and how quickly these reforms are taking place in East Germany.
Just in the past 6 weeks, Mr. Ambassador, 200,000 East Germans have fled, most of them to your country, putting a terrible strain on your infrastructure and your economy. In the short term, how can West Germany handle what's expected to be an even larger flow of refugees?
Well, I think my compatriots in the Federal Republic of Germany have received the refugees with a great emotional welcome and with solidarity. Indeed, the larger number, the growing number of refugees creates growing problems. So far, we have been able to find employment for quite a few of them. The good state of the economy helps. We have had about 300,000 vacant positions beginning of this week, but housing is a growing concern and a growing problem. Thus, it is important that reforms take place in East Germany, and my government has said if these reforms take place, we are willing to do very substantial help and support for these reforms.
It sounds a bit as though you're asking East Germans to stay where they are. And it sounds as though you're asking East German citizens to stay where they are and not come to the West.
No, we have always said it's their decision to take, and whenever they come to us, they are very welcome. They receive our passport and they receive all the other help which we can give to them, to employ them, to accommodate them in the Federal Republic of Germany. The number is growing, but I think you have to recall that after 1945, we have integrated over 10 million refugees from East Germany And so I think even if the number keeps growing, that is a magnitude we can cope with. There's great willingness on our side to do the best to help them and to cope with the situation.
You're saying that you will continue to allow as many East Germans as would like to come into your country. To the extent that that's detrimental to the East German economy, how can West Germany handle that, help East Germany?
We can extend our cooperation. We have very good cooperation in the economic field, industrial and economic connections. We have cooperation in the field of environmental problems, cleaning the rivers, cleaning the air. We have contacts with universities, with partnerships with cities. All these different areas can be extended considerably if this process of reforms take place.
Today, your government announced that they thought the wall should be taken down as soon as tomorrow. Do you think it should be taken down?
Well, I mean, that is the line of the government. I think it would make the progress significant, but I think the main point is really that the citizens now have this perspective of free travel. That was the largest impediment for movement from east to west Germany. And I think this is a very remarkable step if this can be brought about.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for being with us. West German Ambassador Jürgen Rufus speaking to us tonight from San Antonio. NBC News will keep you posted on these dramatic developments today. And on NBC Nightly News, Tom Brokaw will be reporting from East Berlin. I'm Mary Alice Williams.
This has been an NBC News special report. We interrupt this program for an NBC News special report. Here is Mary Alice Williams.
The communist East German government, struggling to survive today, decided to reverse a decades-old policy and let its people go. It announced that they'd be free to travel over any of its borders, including the one with West Germany, including the one through the Berlin Wall, built 28 years ago to stop the kind of East German exodus to the west that we've seen in just the last 6 weeks. President Bush has applauded the announcement as a dramatic development for freedom, but the president said he doesn't think any single event is the end of what you might call the Iron Curtain. Robert Hager is standing by in Washington. Bob?
Mary Alice, the president reacted cautiously, first allowing a couple of hours to go by from the first word before he called reporters into the Oval Office to make his off-the-cuff statements. He said he welcomed the decision, and here you'll hear him refer to the GDR. That means the German Democratic Republic. That's the formal name for East Germany. Here's what the president had to say.
And if the GDR goes forward now, this wall built in '61 will have very little relevance. And it clearly is a good development in terms of human rights. And I must say that after discussing this here with the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor, I'm very pleased with this development. With a truly open border, it is hard to predict how many will be trying to leave. And so it's a dynamic development, and we just have to wait and see.
As you said, Mary Alice, the president said he didn't think any single event would mark the end of the Iron Curtain, but he did say that clearly we're a long way from the harshest days. Reporters asked him about his low-key demeanor. The president insisted that he, in fact, was elated over the developments and said to the reporters, "I'm just not an emotional kind of guy." Mary Alice?
Okay, thank you, Bob. And presidential spokesman Marlin Fitzwater had said earlier in the day that all of the allies are standing by watching and willing to help if necessary. The Pentagon has agreed to temporarily house close to 1,000 of the refugees who have already landed in West Germany. West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl has called for direct talks with East German leader Egon Krenz to discuss the Communist Party's political crisis. Now, just yesterday and today, Krenz purged the old guard, diminished the size of the Politburo, urged free elections, hinted at a multi-party system, promised new laws on freedom of assembly, freedom of association, and freedom of the press. Now, earlier I spoke with West Germany's ambassador to the United States, Jürgen Rufus, and he indicated that a major flow of refugees is going to be a problem.
The growing number of refugees creates growing problems. So far, we have been able to find employment for quite a few of them. The good state of the economy helps. We have had about 300,000 vacant positions beginning of this week, but housing is a growing concern and a growing problem. Thus, it is important that reforms take place in East Germany, and my government has said, if these reforms take place, we are willing to do very substantial help and support for these reforms.
At the Brandenburg Gate now, a major checkpoint between East and West in Berlin. We have Martin Fletcher standing by. Martin, what is the mood of the people after today's announcement?
Jubilant here at the Brandenburg Gate. West Berliners have come here for hours now. They've been shouting across the wall at the East German border guards, shouting at them to let their people go, to break the wall down. They've been lighting candles at the foot of the wall in memory of Germans who died while trying to escape years ago. That'll no longer be necessary.
Details that need yet to be worked out. For instance, visas for people who simply want to go visit as opposed to emigration. How is that going to work, do you know?
Well, most East Germans don't have passports or travel papers, and they won't be able to leave East Germany officially without them, so they'll apply for them. It'll take time, and then they expect here in West Berlin a lot of East Berliners to come across.
How concerned is the government of West Berlin about the economic ramifications on West Germany for taking all these refugees in?
Well, it's interesting because most of the refugees so far who've come across have been young and semi-skilled or skilled, and they've been a great boost to the West German workforce. But at the same time, there's a major housing shortage in West Germany, and the refugees have added to that. So there's been some competition among those in West Germany looking for homes and the refugees, but there seems to be a lot of goodwill to absorbing the East Germans.
Are there calls from the West German government, or suggestions, I should say, to East Germans to stay there, to work within their system and watch the democracy movement grow there rather than emigrating to the West?
Well, yeah, there's a major irony here because for years the West Germans have been calling on the East German government to allow the East Germans who want to leave. But now they're coming in such huge numbers, 200,000 in the last months, 50,000 in the last week alone, that the West Germans are getting worried, and they're calling on the East Germans to put their own house in order. And there's also a call among East Germans in East Germany to those leaving, saying, look, now finally we have a chance to reform our society. Don't leave, stay and help work it out.
How serious is the refugee problem there in West Berlin?
Well, it's pretty serious. There are many refugees who have come through Czechoslovakia and Hungary, and they've come to West Berlin because West Berlin is the outpost of West Germany, if you like. It's closest to East Germany, and many refugees have come here. There's always been a major housing shortage here. They've made it a lot worse, but as I said before, it's kind of a welcome problem, if you like.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. Martin Fletcher at the Brandenburg Gate. East Germany's extraordinary actions have ramifications not only for the political and economic stability of the Germanys, but for the military policies of NATO, the defense policies of America. All of those, no doubt, will be talking points at the Bush-Gorbachev summit next month. I'm Mary Alice Williams in New York. Tonight on NBC Nightly News, Tom Brokaw will be reporting from Berlin.
This points. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson and Late Night with David Letterman will be seen in their entirety following this NBC News special report.
East Berlin tonight. Tens of thousands of people crossing into West Berlin, pouring through the Berlin Wall, which opened today. Not waiting for official visas or even daybreak, they are still coming.
This is an NBC News special report. Here is Garrett Utley.
Berlin, you are looking at a live picture of the Berlin Wall shortly before the dawn of a new day, a day that will see this border built by the communists open to freedom for all in East Germany. And what you're seeing now is taking place at 5:30 in the morning in Berlin, Berlin time. These crowds, mostly young people, have been there all night, celebrating the opening of the wall, welcoming the thousands, the tens of thousands of East Germans coming across to the West. Good evening. We are truly privileged tonight. We are eyewitnesses to history. Who on either side of the Berlin Wall or in this country would have believed this morning that this day would end the way it has? End with the very symbol of the division of Europe, of the division of the free world and that which is not free, disappearing or at least becoming irrelevant. That is the result of the stunning surprise decision today by the leaders of communist East Germany. The announcement that East Germans may now leave their country and cross directly into West Germany, even through the Berlin Wall itself. Tonight, Germans on both sides of the Berlin Wall couldn't wait to test their new freedom. These were sights unthinkable only a few hours ago. Young West Germans atop the concrete barrier reaching out to East Germans, helping them up the wall, despite a barrage of police water cannon. Jubilance and graffiti, where once there was only despair. For 28 years, the wall has been an immutable part of Berlin life, a given, something that was just there. Tonight, it symbolizes something else, the failure of an East German government to resist the wave of change rolling over Soviet bloc nations. And the sound of new freedom, the chipping away of the wall itself, and the system that built it. What we are witnessing this evening in Berlin is the euphoria of human emotion, of course, set against the cold, bleak background of the wall itself. Tom Brokaw and NBC News team in Berlin are covering the events there, and earlier this evening I talked with Tom and correspondent Mike Betcher on the western side of the wall. Tom and Mike, I doubt that you or anyone there at the Brandenburg Gate, or indeed anyone watching this scene this evening, could actually believe what is happening there. Tell us a bit about what you have been experiencing.
Well, it's been a very giddy day here, actually a giddy afternoon and evening. The remarkable thing is that the East German Communist Party announced this almost by accident. It came at the end of a long news conference, and the propaganda minister was reading the details of the policy even as we talked, as you saw. And then when the word began to spread throughout both East and West Berlin, then control was lost on both sides. The people came here, effectively seized control of the wall, and then Mike Betcher, you were, what, up on the wall or looking down onto the other side when the East German kids decided to claim the wall for themselves as well.
Well, there was a dead zone on the other side of this wall, and there's another fence, and no one thought that the East Germans would be able to cross over here. And we looked over, and all of a sudden, several hundred East Germans started running by the East German police who were firing water cannons, and they just could not stop them. And they ran up to the wall, and the West Germans saw them, who were up higher up on the wall, and started pulling them up by the hundreds up on the wall, and many of them are here now.
And we're told tonight, Garrick, as well, that the East Berlin and West Berlin authorities have worked it out so they can move through all of the checkpoints very easily, back and forth both ways. The question is, of course, what will this mean for the East German Communist Party? It offered this gesture in an effort to show that it's serious about reform, but will it be the undoing of the party? That will play out in the next several weeks, months, and maybe as long as a year.
Tomorrow morning, does anybody have any idea of the numbers of people who might be coming through that wall, and are West Berliners prepared to welcome them into their homes or to provide certain care and directions about how to get around West Berlin, how to get around the Western free world?
Garrick, frankly, this whole thing is being handled moment by moment. I don't think anyone is prepared for that at all. One of the leaders of the new forum group, the reform movement on the other side of the wall in East Germany, said tonight that they may lose as many as 1 million people, but then he said many of them will come back and we'll have a chance to revive our country. But we could have, once these floodgates open, an enormous outpouring from East Germany out of curiosity, if nothing else, and the city could be besieged tomorrow, that is West Berlin, because this is where they'll want to come. One young man said earlier tonight, I just want to take a walk across and see what it's like.
I talked to another West German young man who said, I hope I don't lose my job.
Right, and there was an East German guard tonight who said, this is not good news for us. We could lose our jobs. And of course, all of this was going on tonight right up to the moment that the word went out. They were still checking the cars. You were still having to buy the visas. And then suddenly, Garrick, after 28 years, came to a sudden halt. It truly was an example of people power.
Mike Betcher, Tom Brokaw, thank you very much for reporting from the Berlin Wall. We'll, of course, look forward to your reports tomorrow as events continue to unfold. The wall itself, how did it get there and why? 1961, Then as now, East Germany was slowly bleeding to death. Thousands of East Germans were fleeing to the West to freedom and prosperity. Then as now, East Germany's communist leaders were desperate. And suddenly, it was there on that August morning of 1961. It didn't look like a wall at first. It was just a barbed wire fence. But it was enough to stop people. Soon came the stone and the steel and the armed guards with orders to shoot, to kill. Later, there would be watchtowers and minefields. Families were divided. The division of Berlin was also the division of a country and a continent. It was the front line of the Cold War that threatened to turn hot. American and Soviet forces stared each other down, but fortunately, neither side opened fire. It is ironic, but true, that as the communists felt more secure behind their wall, the danger of conflict dwindled. Europe grew more stable and peaceful, but at a price. All these years, it has been the people who have paid for their leaders' decision to build the wall, to hold on to their power. Now today, the people have the freedom for which they have waited so long, and which their leaders have now so grudgingly granted them. In the last 6 weeks, events have moved at a very dizzying pace, catching even the experts by surprise. Protests in the streets, sudden government resignations. It isn't often that one sees history being made so suddenly. Today was the most dramatic of all. NBC's Arthur Kent takes us through those dramatic moments.
Some came to stay, some came just for a visit. They all walked into history as the barrier through the heart of Germany came down tonight.
It's a great moment in my life. I'm 24 years old and I waited for this moment my whole life.
West German police sources say a confidential agreement between East and West Berlin security forces early in the day cleared this crossing, Bornholmer Bridge, as a first breach in the wall. But soon, East Germans crowded through other checkpoints. No visas, no passports, and for some, no intention to go home. Kai Talschau says his family will settle in Munich, West Germany.
It's not all right in the East.
West Berlin's mayor appealed for calm as Berliners milled through checkpoints in both directions. Tomorrow, all crossings are expected to be open. Berliners and all Germans will come to terms with the joy and the worries caused by this sudden, unexpected embrace.
What does this mean for Germany?
Yeah.
For Berlin, what does this mean?
On the one hand, it's happiness, but on the other hand, many problems come to us.
Tonight, at least, the problems of bringing the two Germanys together were forgotten. It was a night to cross bridges, scale walls, a night for a divided nation to come together again. Arthur Kent, NBC News, Berlin.
And as we watch those truly remarkable and very moving scenes from East and West Berlin, this just in from East Berlin itself, the communist authorities there have announced that as of 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, Friday morning, anyone leaving East Germany to the West can go, but first they must obtain a visa. The open-door policy of this evening, the ability of East Germans to go without a visa, is for this night only. As of 8 a.m. tomorrow, they have to have a visa. The communist leaders there have said that anyone who wants one can get one. For the past 28 years, when it was not possible to cross bridges or scale that wall, people have tried to escape any way they could. Their efforts were testimony to their bravery, to their ingenuity, and often to their desperation. And the images remain with us. At first, it was literally a tug of war between the long arm of the oppressor and the desire for freedom. This woman made it. Many more did not. Almost 200 East Germans have died trying to cross the wall or the long border between East and West Germany. For each person fleeing, there was that moment of terror when he or she was a target for the border guards. But still, they came. Sometimes well-laid plans worked. The escape was successful. But we should not forget those who tried and failed. In 1962, an NBC News documentary showed the digging of a tunnel from West Berlin under the wall to bring 59 people to freedom. Piers Anderton was the reporter.
Every 6 feet, they planted 2 uprights, and across them a shaped 4x4, which held up the wooden ceiling. This digger, the man with the beard, Hasso Herschel, was a refugee himself. He had fled East Germany after 4.5 years in a communist prison. Now he wrenched the clay out of the tunnel face with a spade, twisting to fill the cart in a space 3 feet by 3 feet, barely roomier than a coffin. On Thursday, September 13th, they made their last inspection. In August, the builders of still another tunnel had broken through into a cellar and looked up into the eyes and gun barrels of communist police. Some were killed and some were captured. In 10 minutes, the first of the refugees would come. Death was not the greatest danger. Prison camps can be worse. One of the diggers watched his daughter come through, and then his wife. He had escaped from East Germany the year before. His wife had spent 10 months in a communist prison for trying to follow him, and their second child was born in jail. Tonight, for the first time, he held his baby.
That was back in 1962, the NBC News documentary program, The Tunnel. In all, more than 2.5 million East Berliners got out before the wall went up back in 1961. In the next quarter century, 39,000 others somehow breached concrete and barbed wire, and they got by border guards with their orders shoot to kill. Then, during the past 2 years, when the Iron Curtain began to rupture, more than 250,000 have swarmed into the West. Through the years, some have immigrated here to the United States. For them especially, what happened today has special meaning. Here's Bob Jameson.
There could not have been a better night for the annual First Fest in the big German-American community of New Braunfels, Texas. All over the United States, those who had fled Germany found excitement, joy, and comfort in today's historic developments. At Arapahoe High School in Littleton, Colorado today, Tina Dubois was the memory for her German students who were not born when the wall divided her former country. 50-year-old Mrs. Dubois came to the United States from East Berlin, and her family still lives there. The suddenness of the change, the prospect of getting her family out, is overwhelming.
I think this is an extremely exciting thing to happen. You are here and history is being made, and I'm so glad I hadn't kicked the bucket yet.
Many of the readers of New York's Staatszeitung are people born in pre-war Germany. They fled to the United States when the country was divided. The two Germanys were never really the homeland.
Suddenly, this is part of our world again. It's like, you know, like the China wall, so to speak, had been hiding the whole East. Suddenly, you know, we see, hey, there are people like us again, and the past is in some ways present again.
Today is a very special day.
Today was the monthly luncheon of Portland's German-American Society.
Have you heard on the news that the borders between Eastern Germany are open, free, everybody can travel?
And the monthly ritual where they could talk about the past became a special day of talking about the unexpected future.
If you would have asked me a week ago if this was possible, I would never have believed it. It's just... These are our people, our family.
And then, around a piano, they sang a halting, rusty version of Deutschland über alles, once the national anthem of a unified Germany, and tonight, a song of freedom. Bob Jameson, NBC News, New York.
For years, the Berlin Wall has been held up as a symbol of the failure of communism, a place where leaders of the free world could go and orate and challenge the leaders on the other side and not have to think about what they or we would do if the wall were to come down, or at least open up one day. Here are some voices from the past.
Yes, this wall will fall, for it cannot withstand faith. It cannot withstand truth. The wall cannot withstand freedom.
There are some who say that communism is the wave of the future. Let them come to Berlin. This generation of Germans has earned the right to be free. including the right to unite their families and their nation in lasting peace with goodwill to all people. Freedom is indivisible, and when one man is enslaved, all are not free. All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
And now, a personal note, if I may. Many years ago, as a young correspondent with NBC News, I lived in West Berlin. And every morning as I awoke and opened the curtains in my bedroom, the first sight to greet me was of East Berlin, the Brandenburg Gate, and the Wall. And one morning as I stood at the window of my apartment, I had a terrible thought. How easy it was for one to grow accustomed to the Wall. It became part of the landscape, part of your life, until you didn't even notice it anymore. How wonderful it will be for West and East Berliners to open their curtains tomorrow morning, see the Wall, and know it no longer separates them. Now, let's go back to Tom Brokaw at the Wall.
I guess I always thought that 1968 would be the most memorable year of my journalistic career. The deaths of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, the invasion of Czechoslovakia, the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, of course. But 1989, think about what we have witnessed this year on the joyful side of the ledger. Tiananmen Square. The democracy movement is not yet dead. It may be on the run, but it is not yet dead. And then what has been going on in the communist world on both sides of this wall. Climax, what has happened here tonight. The wall effectively has come down. And I mean physically as well. That's a chunk of the Berlin Wall. Men and women atop the wall tonight, hammer and chisel, taking it down symbolically, because realistically, it has been taken down by the people in the last 8 hours or so. They are crossing this wall east to west and west to east. They are being joined once again as one, as freedom-loving people, and no wall can stand in their way. It's a night to remember.
Thank you, Tom. Finally, we must say that here at NBC News, we take a certain journalistic pride in our coverage of the Wall, and not only today. On the day the Wall went up back in 1961, NBC correspondent anchorman David Brinkley was there at the Brandenburg Gate. Tonight, as the Wall opened up, Tom Brokaw was there. And tomorrow, beginning with sunrise on the Today program, Tom and the rest of the NBC team will provide you with full coverage of events in Berlin. I'm Garrett Gutley. Good night for NBC News.
This has been an NBC News special report. We now join the program already in progress.
30 years ago today, the Berlin Wall came down, a barrier symbolizing the